Hello, welcome to Seattle University's webinar series in its online Master of Legal Studies in Compliance and Risk Management. Today's topic is Carrots and Sticks, Environmental Programs. I am your host, Linda Heemer. I'm Senior Director of Graduate Law Programs for Seattle University School of Law. If you are interested in learning more about this program or this topic, please feel free to contact me at 206-398-4268, or you can email me at lawgraduateonline@seattleu.edu. Thank you for joining us. And I'd like to just give you a little roadmap of where we'll be going tonight. We will introduce a faculty presenter. She will share her topic and a little discussion around that. Then I will give you some program highlights, talk about next steps in the program if you're interested in pursuing or applying, and then a question and answer period. I am happy while our guest presenter tonight is speaking to check the chat or the Q&A box to see if there are any questions, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation or reserve them for the end. So I would like to introduce a colleague and friend, Professor Holly Stout. Just briefly, Professor Stout earned her Juris Doctorate at the University of San Diego and her Master in Letter of Laws and LLM postdoctoral program at Vermont Law School. Currently, she serves as a senior attorney at the California Department of Water Resources. She works with the California Water Commission to invest California funds in water storage. At Seattle University in our online program, in the fall, she will be teaching Foundations of Regulatory Compliance. But Professor Stout has the honor of teaching numerous subjects at a variety of some of the leading law schools, including Vermont Law School, the #1 environmental law school in the country, where I first met Holly. So she's a subject matter expert in many things, but primarily climate change and environmental law. So, Holly, please, if you'd like, you can introduce yourself again after unmuting and share any other observations you'd like to share to let the attendees know who you are and where we're going tonight.
Sure, thanks, Linda. I'm really happy to be here to talk about kind of my passion about environmental law programs from a government lawyer's perspective, which I think folds really nicely into compliance generally. So one of the really important things as you're looking from a compliance perspective is, oh my God, why do all of these regulations exist? Why are they all here? What in the world? And generally speaking, all of those types of regulations have fundamentally at the base of it some nugget of a goal. Either it's save the fish, it's restore habitat. In my cases, it's, have fewer greenhouse gas emissions, get water storage, those sorts of things. At the base of any government program is some sort of goal. And so from there, all of the rules kind of grow. Environmental programs generally that are related to climate change are shelved broadly into mitigation or adaptation. And one of the things that I'd like to share is, part of the title of this is, carrots and sticks. And programs can be carrots or sticks. So mitigation, as the name implies, is the idea of stopping additional greenhouse gases from entering the atmosphere. So reducing emissions, those sorts of programs that encourage reduced emissions, smokestack emissions, those sorts of things. Mitigation is making those stop happening. And so then we also get into the adaptation side, which admits that some level of climate change is going to happen, is continuing to happen. And so we're trying to adjust and anticipate where that climate change is going to happen and make it so that we can survive those impacts. So, managing our resources to explain and adjust to those impacts that are going to happen, that we know are going to happen, because you can't just rewind and take all of the greenhouse gas emissions out of the air. That doesn't work. So those are kind of our two baseline ideas of how we address climate change.
Excuse me, Professor Stout, could you give maybe plucked from the headlines, an example of a mitigation and an example of an adaptation?
Certainly. So a mitigation is going to be anything that talks about reducing greenhouse gases. Electric cars, those are mitigation because they are reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that go into the atmosphere. Solar farms, mitigation. Anything that constructively reduces emissions from things that humans need. Electricity is a really big one right now. I have some definite opinions about electricity and where the power comes from and whether or not something actually is mitigation or not, but that's a different topic. Adaptation is something like building a reservoir to store water for a drought that is being caused by climate change. Another adaptation, a hard adaptation, is building a seawall to protect against climate change and rising seas. Those are adaptation things that are designed to address changes that are in the pipeline from climate change.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And I know of course, all you have to do is look at the news to see some of the climate challenges, whether it's from global institutions or closer to home with us on the West Coast is the Colorado River, Lake Mead, Lake Powell.
Yep. Well, and in my own home state in California, we have Lake Oroville, which is the tallest earthen dam in the country, that we had to turn off the power running through it because the lake is too low. And so that cascading effect into the power supply to the entire state of California, all of those things, they all play together. And it's all frankly related to climate change and frankly, my air quality. I don't know about fires in the Seattle, Washington area. I know that there are 5 distinct mega fires going on in Northern California. And so when the wind shifts again, my skies turn gray right now. And that is in relation to drought, which of course is because we're not getting as much water, or we're getting wetter winters and wetter, warmer winters instead of the hard freezes and all of those impacts. So it's all tied together.
And then I know you haven't brought it up, but there is climate change and extinction.
There is climate change and extinction, and there are those out there that will say things like, well, species have always been going extinct. And the answer is yes, but not at this rate, and certainly not as directly human caused. And I'm going to go out on that limb and say the climate change that is happening is in fact because humans have been combusting everything under the sun for the last 200 or so years. And that's bound to have an impact. And that impact is that species who rely on certain climates, the polar bear is a really good example, are losing their habitat and face real threats of extinction because their polar ice caps are melting and they need the ice to survive. So there's all of that biology that goes with it, and they just don't have the ability to adapt fast enough. They can't build seawalls. They can't make artificial ice. It just doesn't happen.
Well, hopefully we can. So I'm happy to think about the carrot versus the stick, which is, in your terms, how would you describe that?
So in my terms, government has this interesting place to play in climate change in environmental law. And they set up programs that are designed to address these problems. And there's the carrot, which is kind of an incentivizing idea where a program is pulled together so to encourage, to meet a couple of goals and to encourage people to participate. So the program that I'm currently working on is the Water Storage Investment Program, which is bond funded in California. So I think this is the wrong text with the slide.
Well, that's embarrassing.
That's
All right. How about
go to the next one and we'll see if it, and I'm sorry, I didn't catch that earlier.
Well, how about you just
okay, that's the cap and trade program now.
Yep. Okay.
All right, that's cap and trade. All right, well, I'm going to explain what the Water Storage Investment Program is, and it is not what's explained on this slide.
Okay. So we just wanted to test you, but I know you could explain it in layman's terms for the attendees.
I absolutely can.
And for those who are in attendance, we will make sure to get everyone a corrected slide deck. And I apologize.
You sent this to me earlier today and I didn't catch it then either. So
you were too busy saving the planet.
So what the Water Storage Investment Program does is it takes these bond funds and it partners with projects that are building water storage. And because California, as the last drought that ended in 2016 showed us, and we were in a drought from about 2012 to 2016, and we started another one in 2018. So arguably it never really ended. We just had a couple of wet years in the middle. It's up in the air. History will tell. But what we learned in the last drought was, of course, we didn't have enough water storage. We had disadvantaged communities whose wells were going dry, where we were trucking water in to meet their fundamental basic need of water. And that's, as a state, unacceptable. So what the voters approved is $2.7 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars to invest in state funds to get water storage happening. Now, the caveat, and it is a pretty big caveat, is that we're investing, we're not granting, we're not giving those funds away. We are investing in these projects and we are going to get out ecosystem restoration. We're going to get out flood control. We're going to get out water quality controls. We're going to get some of those environmental things that are important to the state of California and to the voters out of our investment. And the state of California is going to get a lot more water storage, which we desperately need. And this carrot, right, brings the project proponents to us. And we say, here are our rules that, by the way, you helped us write, because there aren't that many water storage projects in the works. You helped us write these rules. Here are the rules in order that you need to follow to get the money. And this makes it a lot easier to have that conversation of here's what we need and here's what you need to do. The other really good thing that I like about carrot programs like this, where you're partnered or there's an incentive for third parties to comply, is that there really isn't a lot of enforcement action, right? If you have people who are coming to you and saying, well, yeah, we're going to build this project and here are the benefits that you're going to get, and those benefits are then quantified and monetized at this value, that's great. But there's no, well, you didn't give it to us, so here's your stick, really.
Yeah.
And so just getting those programs up and running, it's a much more cooperative effort to get the money out.
And thank you. It's a win-win. And again, too often, and understandably, but too often we politicize. And of course, when you look at the Environmental Protection Acts or the environmental protection agencies, there's sometimes that sense that we need to deregulate to help the economy. Regulations are bad, it limits free enterprise. But in this case, you have that kind of collaborative effort. And again, you incentivize the business, and it's not just the MBAs in organizations and businesses, but then you could work with the risk analysts, the compliance people to help in that policy drafting and that collaborative effort that helps create that kind of a symbiotic relationship.
Well, and with this program in particular, when COVID hit, funny story, because COVID did hit, funny, COVID isn't funny, don't get me wrong.
Oh, no, funny, but peculiar, not
funny,
or
funny,
ironic,
peculiar.
Not funny, huh?
But one of the things that the program actually allowed for was early funding to complete environmental documentation and things, because the funding, of course, is on hold until the project can come in and prove up their benefits. We're generous, but we're not go build it and then show us what your benefits are, right? It's you have to have a more baked project, and then we'll help you with construction costs, which actually works a little bit better. But one of the things that we could do when COVID hit was some of our smaller projects hadn't applied for early funding. And through some emergency regulations, we managed to make it so that we could actually address some economic concerns with some of these projects by getting them the early funding that they could have had but didn't apply for. And STIC programs have a harder time doing that kind of thing. The STIC, California Cap and Trade Program. And this was my project before the Water Storage Investment Program project. And this is from when I was working at the California Air Resources Board. And it is the first in the nation sector-based cap and trade program. And it does what the slide says, which is it requires greenhouse gas emitters to reduce their emissions. So basically the state says total cap on greenhouse gas emissions is X, and it actually looks like this. It goes down over time. So we started in 2014 at whatever we started at, and I've forgotten the numbers, but it then diminishes over time. And emitters, based on your proportion of what we think you're emitting that you have reported to us, here are the number of allowances that you get the first year. And then obviously down here, you don't get as many. And from there, the emitters, through a mandatory reporting process, need to figure out how to have an allowance for every ton of carbon dioxide equivalent that they emit. If they don't have the allowances to surrender at the appropriate time, you get into an enforcement action. And that automatically is somewhat more adversarial because you're looking at, you didn't get enough allowances. Why didn't you get enough allowances? It doesn't really matter why. What matters is you didn't. And frankly, people are monitoring those sorts of things in advance, and there's more conversation in the background. But fundamentally, it's much more adversarial just at the get-go. One of the interesting things about both of these programs is the level of course, stakeholder involvement that gets to the ultimate program before you even start anything. And my personal observation is that in both cases, the stakeholders were very intelligent, intuitive, and wanted to help. In some cases, though, for the Water Storage Investment Program, they were much more helpful because they recognized, I think, that ultimately they were going to get funds out, where this one was more of a protective, it was much more protectionist participation to make sure that everybody could eventually meet their obligations. Oh, and I suppose it's a little late now, but we're going to be really, really clear. Whatever opinions I am expressing are my own and not those of the state of California, because I do technically work for the state of California, and I want to make sure that we're clear. This is not an expression or anything of the sort of the state of California. Sorry.
Well noted.
Okay, so and anyway, so with the cap and trade program, you really do have this, if you don't do this, we're going to enforce, and the enforcement is pretty steep. It's $1,000 per day per allowance that you're short, and allowances are in the thousands to millions per day. It can get up there really, really quickly. And the other, as the program has gone on, as it started, we actually had a couple of enforcement actions that happened immediately for violations of the cap and trade rules on, if you're setting up a trade program, there are rules about what you're allowed to say in public, about your strategies, about those sorts of things, because you're running a market. And that, I still remember, I have children. They were children at the time. They're not this height anymore. They're taller than I am. But I remember being on a soccer field on a weekend because we had to deal with somebody seriously breaking rules that were meant to not compromise our market. And it was a long conversation, and it was not a happy one. I haven't had any of those conversations in the water storage investment program because it's a much more cooperative idea.
Right.
And
do you enjoy your work?
I do. I enjoy the idea that what I'm doing is helping the planet. The program that I'm on right now, I also really enjoy the idea that I'm helping in some small way eventually, because water storage projects take a long time to build, a really long time to build. At some point, we won't have to truck water into disadvantaged communities, or the fish will actually come back, and we can have both of those things. Because we're going to build sufficient storage to make it work. That's a happy thing for me.
That's great. And I know when you're not helping for California, you also teach. And could you share maybe a little bit about your philosophy of teaching and what draws you to a Master of Legal Studies program as a trained attorney?
So what drew me to getting my LLM was the fact that I wasn't a trained environmental lawyer in the first place. I actually, if I was going to label myself an expert in anything, it would be in administrative law, of all things. But because they're so intertwined these days, and what I've been doing, I found myself having some holes in my environmental knowledge. And so that was what drew me into the LLM program as a student. As a teacher, part of what I enjoy the most is actually interacting with those students and seeing, particularly in online programs of all things, the light bulbs happen, and seeing the really improved knowledge and the genesis of ideas in the beginning, and seeing how much they can kind of grow and really be learned in the online program. That's fun for me.
And of course, knowing that this Master of Legal Studies prepares people to see or address problems through the lens of the law without practicing law. And I bet you can see in your work a demand for people with legal and policy knowledge who aren't necessarily attorneys.
Oh, absolutely. I am the only attorney in the group of people that I work with. And I would say probably 50% of what I do is actually more policy than it is legal work. So there is absolutely a need for students with a little bit of legal knowledge, but a lot of how policy and law interact, so that there's an understanding that when you show up and you say, I want to do something, you can also understand that there are some legal things that also need to be considered, and how those interactions happen. It's
And-
really important.
And that's not just for people seeking to work in agency or government work,
Yeah.
but how much more joy it is when you are talking to an organization, whether it's carrot or stick, and the person across the table from you or alongside you also has some legal knowledge. So you're speaking the same language.
Absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite people in the whole world I met while I was an agency attorney. He worked within the agency and is now an outside lobbyist, who has a great policy background and has a couple of times said, I'm really glad I got to work with you because it was helpful to figure out those legal policy implications and those interactions and where I need to be careful but have a little bit of knowledge so that I don't cross into the strictly legal. One of the things that kept coming up in cap and trade was the dormant commerce clause, and everybody's eyes would glaze over, and they should. But it's enough to know that in some programs that could be an issue.
Yeah.
So having that knowledge is key, I think, in working in pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, and that's why we've developed this program and invited scholars and practitioners like you to serve as faculty. Our Master of Legal Studies in Compliance and Risk Management is quite proud of its motto, compliance with a conscience. And as we look at climate change, we look at sustainability, we have to think about the planet, people, and profit. Those are, or prosperity. They're really seen as the three pillars of sustainability. And compliance and risk professionals, whether again internal within organizations, as advocates, in NGOs, in government agencies, can take a leadership role in building a culture that is not just check the box or pay the fine, but really takes a lead. And those opportunities, as you see, as we were talking before the webinar, companies are doing that. When you look at when our last administration announced it was leaving the Paris Accord, what happened? So many businesses and publicly traded companies announced, we will honor it.
Mm-hmm. And having companies like that step up is really important, not only for the sole goodness of stepping up, but because you don't know who's going to look at them and say, well, they're doing that, I bet I could do it too. And you just don't know how many more are going to follow along.
Absolutely. And excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Here we are based in Seattle. And so many of our alumni and the community businesses based here, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, are all part of taking that lead. And I think it was Microsoft that said it would go to carbon neutrality by 2030. Amazon, I think, pledged by 2040. There's a lot of pledging, but that they still haven't figured out how we're going to get there. But there's that shift. I remember going to law school starting in the 80s. And one thing that motivated me was in my first year of law school, the Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred in Alaska. And I had that same moment of the sense of justice and protection of people, planet. I drove a pickup truck from Pennsylvania, my little law school in Pennsylvania, all the way to Alaska and volunteered to sign up plaintiffs in class actions. I ended up practicing law in Alaska because of that man-made disaster. Yeah. And that was 1989. So to see the shift from let's hide it, let's bury it, or let's just dump it and then pay the fine, to know we are taking the lead, not just looking to the government to regulate, but to take that lead. So that's what's so exciting about our program, the timing of our program, and where it's located.
I couldn't agree more. I think, I've looked through the program. Obviously, I'm going to be teaching. I think it's a fabulous idea to go through and do this and really educate people on those three pillars. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so our Master's of Legal Studies is fully online and it's part-time because over 85% of our current students report that they work full-time. And the majority of the students enroll in this program because they want to advance in their current careers and they need a master's degree at least, or more professional development in legal knowledge to advance in managerial positions or to enter the C-suite. Some of our students also report that they'd like to change careers. So that's usually the motivating factor, but they need the flexibility of being fully online, but still knowing that there's a campus to come to and there's a campus foundation in an area where we have so many leaders, global companies leading the charge in compliance with a conscience. So the program is designed, it's a master's. Again, it does not prepare you to practice law, but it's 30 credits. It's designed to take 2 years. There are 6 terms, 3 terms or trimesters per year. And in each term, you take 2 courses. And they're designed to be complementary of each other. And the whole first year are required courses, and then in your second year, you have electives. And we've designed it in phases with the foundational term. In the first term, students take legal analysis, research and writing, and the introduction to the American legal system. And then we move into an operational phase and foundations of regulatory compliance. Your course builds upon the foundation in scaffolded learning to prepare you. And also students will take risk management, contract and policy drafting, and organizational investigations. Then you switch into concentrations. And I can't think of an industry, and some of our students come from maritime, wineries, the cannabis industry, financial institutions, cybersecurity, IT, healthcare, HR. They bring so much of their industry knowledge to the classroom, and they approach it in novel ways. And your expertise from the environmental perspective and the climate change also will challenge students, whether they work for a credit union or they do hope to go to be leaders in environmental law. And then finally, the action phase is to demonstrate that you've achieved the program outcomes. In your final term, there's a capstone project where you create a tangible project to share, and you take a final elective. I'm just checking quickly if there's any questions. So the next steps, actually our fall term is, we have a fall term start and a spring term start. Our fall term starts on September 7th. And our spring term will then run, I believe, January 10th. We are, if anyone thinks, wow, this is the program for me, or has applied or is interested in fall, happy to discuss that with you to see if we can fast track an application. But otherwise, many students are now thinking about starting in the spring. And the important thing is to apply. We have waived the application fee, so there is no risk to applying and finding out more about the program. Feel free to contact me to discuss academic. And if you're interested in financial aid or loan programs, I could direct you to my colleagues in the financial services team. We will respond promptly to all of your inquiries and to your application. And hopefully you will enroll and begin a journey with us. And one of the participants has said she has applied and she's looking forward to hearing from the admissions team. And thank you so much for applying. And you should hear, I recognize your name, you should hear by the end of this week, and you should be pleased with the news you receive. So the deadline to apply for the spring term it may seem like it's far away. It is November 29th, but we encourage people to apply early. It gives them the highest likelihood of available merit scholarship funds. We start with a pool of funds that when we run out, we run out. But and online classes start on January 10th. Again, I'm Linda. I work with you from your first inquiry as a prospective student, all the way hopefully through you being an alum and a valued member of our community. I work with you through your entire academic journey as an academic advisor and as a leader of the program. So I get to know all of my students and I love learning your stories. The most common thing and thread I hear from professors is how much they learn from their students. Doesn't mean we aren't subject matter experts and facilitators, but the enriching and engaging environment that students bring. We are selective. And we try to keep small class sizes. On average in your first year, there's maybe 15 students. Rarely will there ever be more than 20 students in a classroom. You get to know each other and the cohorts are strong. They become friends, even though you're all over the country, and build amazing friendships. It's a collaborative student environment, not a competitive one. So I've just loved what we've done. We just, and what we're building, and having a faculty like Holly with her passion as a scholar, again, as a practitioner and as a teacher, it's just such a joy.
Well, and Linda, I want to really talk about in my experience teaching, it has been a collaborative thing. And I do learn more from my students than I often think I give back, frankly. And it's part of why I enjoy doing all of this too, is because I learn so much from the students, because everybody does have something to give to your program. It's fantastic. I can't say that word enough.
No, and it's not, but we hold our students to a high standard. I know I've worked with you in the past when you said and I have supported you, but similarly, I've supported students who come to me and say, I have a little concern. I think the professor's feedback or a grade was delayed, or that, and I work on that. But I know that students hold their faculty to a high standard too. So I think it's a mutual respect that develops. Knowing that, I think I treat all students like colleagues, because they are. Many of them come from industries and they're just getting an advanced degree. But the demand for making sure that there is value is again mutual. And I want to make sure everyone has a stellar experience. I so respect the time and the financial investment and the emotional investment that people make into furthering their education, especially as full-time employees. But I also know the same for our faculty. You do this for a passion. I know you have a family, and I know you have a full-time job too. So, and when students say, "Oh, I have a project due," you're like, "Yeah, so do I, but I'm going to grade your papers." So again, it's that mutual respect that
exactly.
I think makes for a great learning experience.
Always.
So enough about, and again, I've been teaching online and been head of academic operations primarily for online programs at the graduate level and law school level for over 20 years now. What's interesting is people say, "Oh, that must have been great during COVID." What is interesting, in this program was designed before a pandemic and designed to be fully online. I have seen challenges with other programs where, because in response to COVID, traditional classrooms, traditional professors just took their syllabus from a classroom and showed up on Zoom. And it's, talking head lectures. And a lot of people think now they have a false sense of competency, whereas we have used data, neuroscience to create and use best practices in online design deliberately from the ground up. So I'm very proud of our quality. And people say, oh, I'm sick of Zoom. It's like another reason to take this program. Because we have limited live sessions. And when we do have those sessions, it's usually a dialogue, not a old professor, going on and on like a sage on the stage. They're a guide on the side, and it's a facilitated discussion.
Absolutely. Funny story, if I may. My neighbor at my full-time job is a professor at a law school. And when I explained a few years back that I was teaching online, I got the look. Oh, that's not real. And I thought, okay. And then the pandemic hit and he had to take his classes online. And I saw him at one point and he said, I have a lot more respect for what you're doing, because I don't think I gave them the experience that they paid for. Yeah, actually said that to me. Because all I did was lecture in a Zoom, and that's not the same thing. And I said, oh, thanks. It's so important to have those types of rubrics, conversations when you're trying to learn online. It's so important, and people underestimate the value of that.
Yeah, and this program is designed, again, with a lot of reading and a lot and writing. But why? Because that's what you will do as a compliance or risk professional. And being able to communicate, although we've gone online and we use technology, still the art of reading comprehension and the art of writing. I refer to writing as the art of tangible thinking. So the art of thinking and the art of comprehending is a dying one. And we hope to instill some of those skills and knowledge become so critical for our future leaders.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. I know it's getting late for so many people, but is there any other parting wisdoms or takeaways you'd like to share, Professor Stout?
If you're contemplating pursuing the program, stop contemplating and just do it. You will feel better, I promise, because if you're thinking about it, it means you've already asked the question and you already know that really you want to do it. And it really will help with whatever you're doing. I happen to focus in environmental law. This particular program will really help in any field, in any industry. Just up and do it.
I'm going to have a brochure made. Just up and do it. Thank you. Thank you. No, and what I hear too from the students, unlike law school, you go to get a Juris Doctorate to practice law. You are in school for 3 years, then you study for a bar, then you hope to get a job. Whereas in this program, I hear constantly from students who say, I just finished my first term and I just got promoted. Or last month, Christian Kennedy, one of our students, she gave a student presenter at a webinar. She was a guest presenter, and she said she works for a global pharmaceutical firm, and she had been an English major coming up. And she said now in this program, she has leaders in her company saying, all of a sudden you're asking questions that no one ever has. You're helping us see issues and give a point of view that none of our MBAs or our PharmDs, our doctors, no one's doing that. And she's also been promoted or given new duties. So we hear it regularly from our students. What they're learning in the classroom is relevant and timely immediately in their jobs.
Absolutely.
And they bring those daily challenges. Of course, they redact and protect the confidentiality of their company, but they bring those challenges to the classroom, and someone will say, oh my gosh, that just happened at my winery, or that just happened in our bank. And they can help help solve those problems and realize that the industry, like you said, the industry you're in uses similar knowledge and skills regardless, when it comes from legal or policy perspectives.
Absolutely. And, in terms of the course that I'm teaching, compliance is a huge deal. Failing to comply is a huge deal and can cost millions, billions. And so learning those foundations, even if that's not where you think you're going to go, may give you the opportunity to ask the right question. And 9 times out of 10, asking the right question is the key to making sure that you don't misstep, particularly when it comes to compliance.
Absolutely. And being able to liaise with cross-functional teams too, whether it's in understanding data breach response to understanding HIPAA laws from your HR team. So,
yep.
All right. Well, I know it's just about time, and I just want to thank you again and thank all the participants. And like Professor Stout says, just up and do it. I hope to see your applications, or I hope to hear from you. And just one person in the chat, just Elena saying thank you for today's very informative discussion. You are welcome, and thank you, Professor.
My pleasure, anytime.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and end the meeting, and I wish you all continued wellness.
Bye, everyone.